Netflix released its weed-themed documentary, Grass is Greener, on, are you ready for it? 4/20. Fitting, right? But it's also wildly interesting. Fab Five Freddy from MTV Raps back in the day is the director and the narrator of this documentary. What it does is it follows America's complicated just history with the wacky weed. The first half of the documentary focuses on the music industry, and it is awesome. I mean, I learned so much about jazz and the influence of cannabis within jazz and jazz on cannabis, and then how much of the songs really talked about and featured cannabis, and some of it just openly and blatantly. And we're not just talking about obscure artists either. I mean, we're talking about Cab Calloway, Louis Armstrong, and a bunch of big name artists who just really, they're open about their cannabis use. As expected, we do have interviews from Snoop. I mean, come on, how could you have a documentary about cannabis and not have Snoop featured in it at some point? But we also have interviews from lawyers and PhDs. And then the documentary transitions away from the music scene and more into the social and the legal system, and how America's view on cannabis really shaped a lot of our current laws and how it affects, more than anybody, the African American population. It's a great cultural study, and it offers a lot of insight into how cannabis is criminalized. And the storytelling itself, it feels really balanced. I mean, this is not just a piece on pro-pot propaganda. Did you like that alliteration? One thing that I do wish the documentary had done more and focused on more is how there have not been many clinical studies on marijuana and its effect on people. Now that's because it's a Schedule I drug, and so it is illegal federally. I mean, just across the board. And they list a bunch of not only Schedule I drugs in the documentary, but 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it's insane at some of the things that you would think would be Schedule I that are just absolutely they're completely illegal. There is no medical use for them. There's no medical benefit. They're highly addictive. And yet they're Schedule 2, 3, 4, or 5. It's insane. I mean, even meth is in one of those that is not Scheduled 1. It makes no sense. Going back to what I was saying about there not being a lot of clinical studies done on the effects of marijuana on people and it being a Schedule I drug, they do have one interview which is just brief too. It barely touches on it, and they don't really go into explaining it, but it's with Bonner, or I don't know his name. He's some politician who is like Speaker of the House or something. I hate politics, so I don't really know who he is or what he is, other than he was part of the US Congress, maybe? I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. You can tell me in the comments. I don't really care. But what's needed is some actual decriminalization of this from a federal standpoint so that they can do true studies on it. And then, hey, you know what? You can make your findings known. Even though the documentary does talk about some findings that happened through the federal government and how it completely contradicts what the government was saying to, the government is holding up that, no, this is bad. This is on par with heroin and cocaine, and it needs to be eliminated. And then you have these studies come in and say, well, actually, it's medically beneficial in certain ways, or it doesn't really do the things that you're saying it does. I mean, they're not outright saying, oh yeah, no, everybody should smoke pot, but they are just saying, what you were saying is not totally true. Now, there is a lot of research out there about cannabis and its effect, but most of it is anecdotal. So I hope at some point it will become at least studied, even on the federal level, figure out some loophole that they do. I mean, they do all kinds of stupid loopholes in government. So figure that out so that you can get a true, non-biased scientific study on it, and then make a decision from there. I'm not a pot user, so I'm not pushing for everybody to go out and just start using it. But from a practical standpoint, I say legalize it and then tax it. I think the documentary was very fair in what it presented, that it was not trying to be just a pro-pot piece. I mean, yes, it does have that bent a little bit, but I think it really sheds more light on the cultural and the justice system and what that does to other populations. At the very least, I found it uber interesting just to see, not only from the musical aspect, but then also to see how it affected communities within the United States, and to see also the facts and the figures of within the US at when things were decriminalized, or if they're still not decriminalized, or just even the money that is brought in and the amount of people that use or don't use. I enjoyed watching this documentary, and I think it raises some really interesting points. There is no sex or violence. There is a lot of profanity and some brief nudity. I give Grass is Greener 4 out of 5 couches. So are you in favor of legalizing cannabis federally? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.